Okay, so now we're going to fiddle around a bit with the colors here and try and get things that the values a little bit more in place where they need to be. I've done the best I can up to this point, but when we want color, it does change a lot. So I'll have to see what we can do with that. For the this foreground thing, sometimes changing one thing fixes everything else. So I'm going to try changing the brightness if I can. Yeah, on that foreground, making that darker. If anything is going to be close to black, um, it'll be something up close like that. Only if we're talking about like shade. See how making that a lot more darker in the foreground there, how that kind of really did push back the midground. So if I were to put it back to its original color, which is here, you almost just don't even notice that stuff in the foreground. But when I do this, it just pulls itself, it puts itself in the foreground and pushes everything else back, right? So that's because of, again, because of the values. Let's use our color picker and have a look at some of the values here. Um, excuse me. Get into color picker mode here, and I'm going to choose this foreground color. Now note where it's at on the gray scale here. The gray scale being in between from white to dark, right? It's about like over here. Let me do it again for this. Um, that's just totally black. I don't know what I selected there. Trying to get the foreground here. Yeah, that's where it is. It's in that, it's just very close to black, which is acceptable only for the foreground. Now I'm going to go back down to the sketch area. And actually what I need to do is just make a new visible. Do I have one already? Yeah, no, I need a new one. A layer from visible. Okay, yeah, okay. So that's near black. Let's select a color, a dark color on her dress. And that one has some color to it, but it's also it's further over to the left area, not over here in the white area, right? So those two colors are a little bit too close for me. Because she should be much further back than these, and therefore a shadow at her distance shouldn't be anywhere near the same value as the shadows in these foreground. And what we're looking at basically this foreground, grass coming up, we're basically looking at just shadow colors. I might add light to it, but I haven't yet, so that's what that was meant to be. And the white on her, the lightest part of her skirt is very, very close to the white. So I think what I think, what I was thinking previously when I was looking at this is that basically the values are way too strong for her. And for this whole, the middle ground there, not the super foreground. So I want to go back there and I'm going to experiment with let me just turn off this. And for black and white, see, that's perfect. That would have been great because it's nice, strong contrast. Or is it? Maybe it's too strong, right? I mean, I just like the way that looks right now. But when we go into color, it's a totally different ball game. We don't want as high of a contrast to get realistic. So what I want to do in this situation is, and let me do this one more time just to see if it's the same here. I'm going to compare, that's her dress, and then here is the foreground. And it is a little darker. It's dark. There is a significant difference between the darkness of there and the darkness of here. And look, I can even, yeah, even if I draw with that color there, you can see it's totally different. If I go back and select, and this is all very, very important stuff to pay attention to. Now I'm going to select the color of her dress. If I draw that there, it kind of blends in, right? And it doesn't, yeah, nah, it's still a little too close to that color. I want it to be very different. Excuse me, of hay fever. Um, okay, foreground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to, forget about these visible layers, the sketch layer, and I'm going to play with the contrast, brightness contrast on this, which we'll use the color tools here. Color balance. No, not color balance actually. Where is it? Just brightness contrast is enough. I'll just make it brighter, just like that. Now look at how, even just by doing that, what if I make it real bright? It's almost like you're making it go further and further into the distance with that. See how it's just so much more different from this foreground. It's really just making it on a totally different layer almost. I like that a lot better. So now let me turn my color back on and see how that turns out. Now I just think it's a bit more realistic, or at least it, maybe not realistic. It's almost too bright, but I can deal with it. I can work with that. I can see that being a bit more what I had in my imagination. Okay, so I'm gonna work with that, and that's just a tip right there too. Now I'm gonna leave the color on and go back into that mode with the brightness contrast. And what if we were to make it darker? And you can do it however you want. Everybody's different. Maybe it's actually just a dark day too. It's cloudy and it would be like that. It's a very bright day. You go like that. But with that also comes the contrast. So here if I make my contrast stronger or weaker, it's going to have a huge effect on this whole phenomenon, because that's what we're talking about. That's values, right? Let me cancel what I did there. I also want to undo. Yeah, I want to go back to this. This is the original I had. Yeah, see how that seems out of place now? It almost seems like the contrast is too high. I have to get used to it the other way. Um, and with the color on, because now instead of just making it a bit brighter, I'm gonna make it a bit brighter and play with the contrast and see what happens. I actually want the contrast to be lower. So it seems that's basically the definition of something being further off in the distance, is to have lower contrast like that. Okay. But wow, see, and this is the original. See how after playing with it, it just seems really, really out of place. Okay. Definitely gotta get brighter. I'm just gonna make it brighter and leave it at that. Okay. I keep saying I'm done, and then I keep going and playing with it again. I'm like, okay, okay, okay. No, really, this time. No, no. Just one more time. Okay. So there's that. See, now when I tap on it, I'm getting grays out of the shadows, which is what I wanted, instead of something closer to the black. We'll reserve that really dark black for this foreground, this super foreground, as I call it up here. And now we can play with the colors a little bit. I really don't have much to say about this. What we do for starters, one thing I was thinking that perhaps the sky isn't, or these mountains, this grassy field or hilly area doesn't look like it's going far enough into the background. So I thought I might experiment with that. One easy thing to do would be to take a white sheet, basically like a white cloud, and just cast it over there with a gradient. Since we're in the since we're in digital here, right? Something like that. But it's going to go over all the other colors that I have. That does work for the distance. What if I can select, uh, no, I need to select all of the white area. That's color picker. It kind of does the job, right? And then I go invert of that, and I could take a brush or airbrush. Yeah, let's do it with airbrush. If I were to do invert, that is invert the selection. So now, yeah, I'm only on these colored areas here, and just brush that off a bit. There's actually no point at all in my doing that selection. It was not very useful. I guess the point was I didn't want to hit those buildings there. I was trying to keep them on their own. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Did that help at all? I kind of feel like it was a waste of time and energy. But it never hurts to experiment a bit. I have to fix some of the colors here and here. See how it just makes it look like it's a bit more distant now, just like misty. But I just don't like it. Somehow it looks cheap. Not that far back. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff to be done with this. I've done absolutely nothing in this video so far, so I'm just going to leave it at that. The only thing we learned this lesson is to play. Another great reason to separate your values layer from your color layer is that you can come back and do tricks like that and learn things as you go along. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna have to keep playing with the colors. I'm gonna go into time lapse for that, and then if there's anything significant worth talking about, I'll come back. Yeah, so enjoy the time lapse. So as you can probably see in the time lapse, I have a lot of like little detail work that I did. It just brought some of the contrast, stronger contrast in the foreground here, and did a little bit more work on the detail of the trees and stuff. And then one thing I did off camera was this blur effect that I didn't realize wasn't recording. All I did for that was go into this layer and I got the magic wand and selected all of the background areas that I wanted to separate from the foreground to try and blur them. It was actually just an experiment. And what happened when I blurred it, it was a pretty cool effect. It came out like this. What it does, I didn't even intend to do this, but it had a radiating light effect because what happens is as it blurs, it kind of like, smears it around, and it pushed it over all of the surrounding foreground objects so that the light from the background is kind of like, going over some of these objects in the foreground too, which is a phenomenon that happens in real life, I think, if it's a very, shiny, sunshiny day, because light isn't just like, life as we see it with our eyes isn't like these sharp, vivid lines everywhere. It's more of, radiating all around. And it gives it that kind of special effect to a certain kind of feeling, maybe something like romantic or like that in some anime movies. They have that certain kind of effect where it's like dreamy or moody or something like that, right? So I thought that turned out well. And I decided that I'm going to just keep it like that because I like it. So what we have is the foreground is going to be blurred, background is blurred, and we have all the focus in this area here in the midground. But what that leaves us with is kind of a contrast in styles here, a contrast in vision. She is like too sharp now. She has this almost like chalky, pencily kind of look to her, and everything else is just sort of like, blurred off. So she's a little bit too contrasted. So I'm going to do now is just focus on smoothing her out a bit, and also her face at this distance. She might look like okay if you zoom in. It seems like, her eyes where eyes should be and nose and everything. But if you zoom out, that tiny little size difference, it almost makes it seem like she has a really big nose, um, which would, which is fine. But I mean, since we're making art and trying to have everything all perfect and dreamy, why should she have a big nose? Let's give her, yeah, a more normal face. So I'll work on that a little bit. Just the eyes and the dress and stuff and everything else I think is fine. So yeah, whether or not I do that in time lapse or just show you the finished product, that's going to be the end of this episode. And next episode is going to be a time lapse of everything from the sketch phase to the value phase and all that stuff, and with some background music. So stay tuned and we'll see that one. See you next time. And don't forget to keep drawing.